A black man enters a luxury car dealership to buy a car and is humiliated by the salesman. Before the story begins, if you like our channel, subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. And now, we invite you to enjoy a story with an unexpected ending. Mark was a man who carried the determination in his eyes of someone who never gave up, even in the face of adversity. Born and raised in a humble neighborhood on the outskirts of town, he was the second child in a large family. His father was a construction worker, and his mother was a housekeeper. Money was always tight, and any unforeseen event like an illness or a broken appliance meant an even greater struggle to balance the bills. From an early age, Mark got used to dealing with the harsh reality of someone who had to fight to survive. Still, he had something that set him apart, an inquisitive mind and eyes full of dreams. His passion for cars began at the age of 10. Mark spent hours watching cars on the street, imagining what it would be like to drive those sleek vehicles he saw in TV commercials. While other boys collected stickers or played soccer, he flipped through old car magazines he managed to borrow from the neighborhood junkyard. "One day, I'll own one of these," he'd say, even when his reality seemed to contradict his words. For Mark, dreaming wasn't just an exercise of imagination, it was a way to resist what life tried to impose. But there was something he understood early on. If he wanted to turn his dreams into reality, he'd need to work harder than anyone around him. After all, he was black, poor, and from a place where few believed in the possibility of rising above it. At 14, Mark started working as an assistant in an auto repair shop to help his family. It was hard work, but he loved being close to the cars. He paid close attention to the experienced mechanics, absorbing every detail, every technique. Despite his low wages, he began saving a small portion with the idea of investing in his education. At 18, he finished high school and began doing small electrical jobs to supplement his income. He repaired fans, installed light fixtures, and did maintenance on electrical networks, all while studying at night. He knew that knowledge was his best chance to change his life. Over the years, Mark managed to save enough money to start his own small electrical business. At first, he did everything himself, served customers, did the work, and handled the administration. But his honesty and skill quickly caught people's attention, and he started gaining loyal clients. "You're different, Mark. You work like you're doing it for your own house," a customer once told him. That phrase became his motto. For Mark, the only way to grow was by always delivering his best. His business grew. He started hiring employees, invested in courses to improve his skills, and began serving bigger companies. After years of hard work, he was finally financially stable. He could give his family the comfort they had never had, and for the first time he began considering the possibility of fulfilling one of his biggest dreams, buying a luxury car. For Mark, the car wasn't just a vehicle, it was the symbol of everything he had achieved. It was the materialization of years of effort, sleepless nights, and moments when he had to believe in himself, even when no one else did. For months, he researched different models. He watched videos, read articles, and compared prices. Finally, he found the perfect car, a luxury sedan that combined elegance, power, and cutting-edge technology. He decided to pay for it in full, without any debt, as a reminder that every penny invested in that dream had been earned with sweat. On the Saturday morning, when he finally decided to go to the dealership, Mark felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. He knew he was entering a space that, historically, hadn't been designed for people like him. Still, there was an inner strength telling him that he deserved to be there. As he drove his simple car to the dealership, he remembered all the times he had been underestimated, in school, at work, and even by people who doubted his ability to change his life. But that day, he wouldn't let others' expectations define his fate. Mark parked in front of the luxury car dealership, looked at the display window reflecting the shiny, unattainable models he had admired as a child, and walked in, determined to make his dream come true. The automatic door slid open smoothly, and Mark entered the luxury car dealership. The environment was impressive: glass walls that let in natural light, marble floors that gleamed like mirrors, and cars perfectly aligned, like true works of art. Despite the stunning setting, Mark immediately felt the weight of being there. The silence that dominated the space seemed to amplify each step he took. There were few customers in the store, but the curious and judgmental stares were impossible to ignore. Mark walked slowly, admiring the cars. He knew that this was an environment where appearance mattered a lot. He wore simple clothes, jeans, a polo shirt, and casual shoes. To him, his clothes didn't define his worth, but he quickly realized that in this space, it could be interpreted otherwise. In the distance, a salesman watched him. He was a middle-aged man in a sharp suit with meticulously styled hair. There was something in his gaze that made it clear he was assessing Mark, not as a potential customer, but as someone who probably didn't belong in that place. The salesman took a few minutes before approaching, as if trying to make it clear that serving Mark was not a priority. When he finally arrived, he gave a smile that seemed more sarcastic than friendly. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you?" he asked, his tone carrying a hint of disdain. Mark, maintaining his calm demeanor, responded politely. "Good afternoon. I'm interested in that model over there," he said, pointing to a black luxury sedan with elegant lines and a futuristic design. The salesman followed Mark's gaze to the car and let out a brief laugh as if he found the situation absurd. "That model? Well, just so you know, it starts at 500,000 reais, he said, emphasizing the price as if to discourage Mark. "Maybe you'd like to check out the used car section. We have more affordable options there." Mark felt the impact of those words, but he decided not to react. He was used to this type of treatment and knew that losing his temper would only reinforce the salesman's prejudices. "No, thank you. I've done my research and I know exactly what I want. It's this car," he replied firmly, looking the salesman straight in the eye. The salesman raised an eyebrow, surprised by the response. "I see, but just to clarify, are you planning to finance or pay in full?" he asked, stressing the word finance with a dose of skepticism. "Pay in full," Mark answered without hesitation. Despite the direct response, the salesman maintained the same attitude. He started talking about the car, but without the enthusiasm or attention he should have offered any customer. It was clear he didn't believe Mark was serious about buying it. With each sentence, Mark felt the veiled hostility grow. The salesman constantly interrupted the conversation to greet other customers, avoided eye contact while speaking, and even took a phone call in the middle of the explanation. At one point, a well-dressed couple entered the store, and the salesman immediately changed his attitude. "Excuse me for a moment," he said to Mark, before leaving to attend to the new customers, leaving Mark standing by the car. The couple received a completely different reception: warm smiles, handshakes, and a detailed tour of the cars in the store. Mark watched from a distance, trying to keep calm, but the feeling of being ignored was hard to endure. After patiently waiting for a few minutes, Mark decided it was time to act. When the salesman finally returned, he asked, "Can we continue? I'd like to know more details about the car." The salesman sighed, visibly impatient. "Sure, but just to confirm, have you considered whether you can afford the costs of this car? It's not just the purchase price, you know. Maintenance, taxes, it can be a bit heavy." Mark understood the unspoken message. "You don't look like someone who can afford this." Still, he kept his composure. "Yes, I've done my calculations. I'm aware of all the costs. Now, if you could provide me with the technical details." The salesman began to explain, but in a mechanical way, without even looking directly at Mark. It was evident that he was just waiting for Mark to leave. Mark felt the discomfort grow, but decided not to give in. He knew he would face moments like this throughout his life, and every time he stood firm, he felt he was not only defending himself, but also paving the way for others who would face the same prejudice. After long minutes of cold and uninterested service, Mark felt the weight of prejudice grow with every gesture from the salesman. However, he remained firm, determined not to give up. He knew that if he gave in to that hostile environment, he would be paving the way for others to be treated the same way. Mark looked again at the luxury car he had chosen. Its details gleamed in the natural light pouring into the store, and he pictured himself behind the wheel, living a dream he had carried since childhood. But at the same time, he felt the disdainful gaze of the salesman, who seemed incapable of seeing beyond his simple appearance. The salesman, noticing that Mark persisted, adopted an even more sarcastic tone. "Look, I'm just trying to save you time. Many people come here just to look and dream a little. Nothing wrong with that, of course," he said, with a forced smile that hid an evident mockery. The comment was made loud enough for other customers in the store to hear. Mark noticed curious stares, turning toward him, evaluating him as if they were trying to figure out whether he truly belonged there or if he was just another curiosity in this luxury environment. Mark took a deep breath. He knew he was being publicly humiliated, but he decided to stay calm. "I'm not here to dream, I'm here to buy, and I'd like you to continue with the information about the car," he replied, firmly and with dignity. The salesman laughed, a short, incredulous laugh, and shook his head. "All right, but tell me, do you really think you can afford this? This car isn't just an initial investment. We're talking about annual maintenance that costs as much as a regular car. I don't mean to be rude, but it's important to be realistic." The salesman's words echoed in the room. By this point, other customers had stopped pretending disinterest and were openly watching Mark. Some whispered to each other, while others seemed to be just waiting to see how he would react. The salesman crossed his arms, as if expecting Mark to admit that this was a mistake, that he was in the wrong place. "Maybe you want to start with something more affordable, a used model perhaps, or maybe something more within your range," he suggested, pausing deliberately before finishing the sentence. The tone was clear. He was saying without saying that he believed Mark didn't belong in that space, and worse, that he was there to display an impossible dream. Mark felt his face burn, but he didn't let it show. He looked around, realizing that the silence in the store was almost absolute. Everyone seemed to be waiting for him to react, perhaps with anger, perhaps with a gesture of defeat. But Mark knew that this was the moment to show who he really was. He chose his words carefully. "You're assuming a lot about me, aren't you? Maybe more than you should. Now please, call the manager. I think we need to resolve this differently." The salesman became visibly uncomfortable. He hadn't expected Mark to have the courage to confront him so directly. He hesitated, but eventually agreed, muttering something like, "All right, I'll call the manager." As the salesman walked away, Mark noticed the stares still fixed on him. The silence in the store seemed deafening. He wasn't just facing personal prejudice, he was being judged by an entire group of strangers who seemed to share the same thought. He doesn't belong here. Mark took a deep breath and looked once more at the luxury car in front of him. He knew this moment would be hard to forget, but he also knew he had the chance to turn it into something greater. The salesman returned with the manager, a man in a well-tailored grey suit, with fine glasses and an expression of someone used to handling delicate situations. He looked at Mark and immediately sensed the tense atmosphere. Some customers were still watching the scene with curiosity, while others pretended to be distracted but were clearly following every detail. The manager approached with a professional smile. "Good afternoon, sir. My salesman informed me that you're interested in our latest model. How can I help you?" he said in a polite but somewhat mechanical tone. Mark shook his hand firmly, but before responding, paused. He looked at the salesman standing next to the manager, visibly uncomfortable, and decided it was time to clarify what had happened. "Before we talk about the car, I think it's important we talk about the service I received here today," Mark began, with a calm but firm tone. "I came into this store with the intention of realizing a dream. However, I was treated as if I had no right to be here, as if my appearance was an indication of what I can or cannot buy." The manager stood silent for a few seconds, clearly caught off guard by Mark's frankness. He cast a quick glance at the salesman, who quickly averted his gaze, trying to avoid responsibility. "Sir, I apologize if there's been a misunderstanding. This is certainly not the experience we want to provide our customers," the manager replied, attempting to defuse the situation. But Mark was unwilling to accept empty apologies. He needed to make it clear that this was not just about him, but about something much larger. This isn't just a misunderstanding. It's about how we're judged before we even get a chance to show who we are. If this is how you treat customers, I wonder how many others have gone through something similar here. The manager tried to smooth things over. I understand your point, and I assure you this doesn't reflect our customer service policy. I can personally guide you through the purchase process to ensure you have the best experience possible. Mark shook his head. I appreciate that, but I want to clarify one thing before we continue. I'm here because I've worked my whole life to realize this dream, and yes, I'm buying this car, in full. Here are my documents and proof of payment, he said, pulling a leather folder from under his arm and placing it on the nearest table. The manager opened the folder and saw the documents, a bank statement that clearly showed Mark had more than enough to pay for the car. He looked at Mark, surprised, then at the salesman, who now seemed ready to disappear in shame. Sir, I see that you're more than qualified for this purchase. Once again, I apologize for any inconvenience. Let me have someone assist you immediately to finalize the process, the manager said, now visibly more careful. Before proceeding, Mark made sure to leave a clear message. It's not just about money. I could not have this amount in my account, and I would still deserve to be treated with respect. What happened here today cannot continue to happen, and I hope you really learned something from this, Mark said. The manager nodded, his face serious. He knew that the repercussions of this moment could be disastrous for the store's image. You are absolutely right, and I can assure you we will take the necessary steps to prevent this from happening again. Mark insisted that another staff member assist him, someone not involved in the incident. A young salesman was called, and his attitude was completely different, polite, attentive, and professional. He explained all the details of the car, answered Mark's questions, and within minutes the contract was signed. While Mark waited for the car's delivery, the salesman who had humiliated him was called back by the manager. They spoke in low voices, but it was clear the employee was being reprimanded. Mark watched from a distance, not with the intention of seeking revenge, but hoping that this moment would serve as a valuable lesson. When the car was finally delivered, gleaming and flawless, Mark started the engine. Before leaving, he looked at the salesman, who was still standing near the manager, and said, "Remember, don't judge a book by its cover. You never know what's inside." With that, Mark drove his car out of the dealership, feeling not only the weight of a personal victory, but also the satisfaction of having faced prejudice with dignity. As Mark drove his new car through the streets, he felt a mix of emotions. There was pride in the accomplishment of his dream, but also an emotional weight from the circumstances surrounding it. He knew that this moment of personal victory was bigger than just him. It was an example of the fight against prejudices that still persist in society. The episode didn't remain confined to the walls of the dealership. One of the customers who had witnessed the scene from the start decided to share the story on social media. The post, accompanied by a photo of Mark next to his new car, quickly went viral. "Today, I saw something that should never happen. A man was treated as invisible just because of his appearance, but he left the store with dignity and left a lesson I will never forget," the customer wrote in their post. The story sparked thousands of comments and shares, leading to heated debates. Many praised Mark's posture, while others criticized the dealership and questioned how situations like that could still happen. Pressed by the negative backlash, the dealership published an official statement on their social media. The message began with a public apology to Mark and acknowledged that the service had been inadequate. "Our commitment is to treat all customers with respect and excellence. We acknowledge that we failed, and we are implementing measures to ensure that situations like this never happen again," the statement read. Furthermore, the salesman who had humiliated Mark was temporarily suspended and sent for re-education training. The dealership also announced that they would conduct workshops on diversity and inclusion for the entire team. The fallout gave Mark a platform to share his story. He was invited for interviews in newspapers and television shows, where he spoke openly about the episode. But instead of using the platform to criticize the dealership, he chose to focus on a message of change and awareness. "This wasn't the first time I've been underestimated, and unfortunately it won't be the last. But what matters is how we choose to respond. My intention is not to point fingers, but to show that we need to change the way we see each other, he said in one of the interviews. Mark's words inspired many people. He received messages of support from those who had gone through similar situations and felt represented by his stance. Some shared stories of how they decided to confront prejudice at work, in school, and even in everyday interactions, motivated by his courage. The dealership, feeling the impact of the incident, made significant changes to its practices. The sales team began receiving regular training in humanized service and diversity, and the dealership's environment began to reflect a more welcoming attitude. But the biggest change was in the salesman who had humiliated Mark. He sought out Mark days later, asking for a second chance to apologize in person. "I was wrong, and I was really wrong. I hope you can forgive me, but above all, I want you to know that I've learned from this," he said sincerely. Mark, in his usual dignified manner, accepted the apology. "The most important thing is that you've truly learned. That's what makes the difference," he replied. Years later, when Mark looked at his car, he didn't see just a material possession. He saw the symbol of his journey, a constant reminder that his fight was bigger than more just a personal dream. It was about paving the way, challenging expectations, and showing that dignity always prevails, even in the most difficult situations. Mark's story continued to be told, inspiring people to question their prejudices and believe in their own ability to face the world with courage and resilience. And you? Have you ever stopped to think about how many times you've judged someone by their appearance? Mark's story reminds us that a person's true worth can never be measured by their clothes, social status, or any other superficial detail. What truly matters is character, and that, as Mark proved, is something no one can take away. If this story moved you, if these events and reflections added something new to your journey, don't forget to share this video. Give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and help us share these stories and thoughts with even more people.